Welcome everybody to this United States Senate senatorial forum between Richard Blumenthal, Democratic candidate, and Leora Levy, Republican candidate for United States Senate. My name is Michael Bloom, and I am the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation Association of Connecticut. JFACT is an advocacy organization which lobbies city, state, and federal officials on issues of importance to the 7 Jewish federations and their beneficiary agencies. Tonight's forum will focus on issues that are critical to the Jewish community and is sponsored by all 7 Jewish federations across Connecticut. For those tuning in, we are recording this and we'll post this to our YouTube page. You can search using Jewish Federation Association of Connecticut. If you would like to ask a question, please put it in the chat and we will try to get to it. Since this is a forum and not a debate, each candidate will have roughly 25 minutes with our community alone, for which we are grateful. Up first is Ms. Levy. Welcome. Please take a few moments, introduce yourself, and make an opening statement.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. It's a pleasure to be with you and with all of your listeners. I'm Leora Levy. My name Leora means my light. I was named after a little boy named Leo, who I consider to be the angel who saved his parents and his sister, my mother, and my grandparents. You see, it was his death of diphtheria that was the catalyst that spurred my grandparents to leave Europe in 1940. They left Lithuania through a perilous train trip through Germany to Genoa, Italy. Were able to get on the last American ship to New York, made it to Ellis Island, but then were turned away because there was a quota for Jews. They were not allowed into the country. They were going to be sent back to Europe to be murdered along with the rest of the family who didn't escape. Luckily, they were able to get visas to Cuba. And so in 1940, my mother and her parents arrived in Cuba. I was born in Cuba. 20 years after my mother and her parents arrived in 1960, we again escaped Cuba. We escaped Castro's communist revolution and were very blessed to be admitted to the United States. And my life here has been an American dream. But I've never been so worried about our country. And I am running for US Senate to make sure that my children and theirs, your children and your grandchildren have the same opportunity to live whatever their American dream is that I have had. You see, we have very high inflation, high prices that are making life unaffordable for so many people here in Connecticut. We have an invasion at our border. It's not immigration, it is an invasion bringing fentanyl, human trafficking, and other associated problems with it, including terrorists who have crossed our border. They've intercepted at least 80. We don't know how many have come across unknown, captured. We have also high crime. In Connecticut, they passed a police accountability law. Now we know that that is a state issue, but one of the provisions of that law is that they remove the qualified immunity of our cops. And I've been endorsed by the Connecticut State Fraternal Order of Police because they know I will have their backs. And one of my priorities when I get to the Senate will be to find a way to provide qualified immunity for them on the federal level. Israel has always been a priority for me. I was raised in a very Zionist family. In fact, the reason my mother and her parents were admitted to Cuba was that they were able to prove, my grandfather was able to prove his involvement in Zionist organizations in Europe, that he was not a communist. So 3 generations of my family have been strong Zionists and supporters of Israel. My grandparents on my other side were recognized by the state of Israel in the 1960s for what they did for the state. My husband and his family also very staunch Zionist. One of his grandfathers was among the early founders of the UJA Federation in New York. That is always the first check we write every year. And we are major donors to the UJA Federation. My husband was president of the Greenwich Federation in the 90s, and I was on their board for quite a few years. So we are very involved with Israel. I was very lucky to be in the gallery of the Congress when Prime Minister Netanyahu came and addressed a joint session of Congress on the JCPOA in 2015, hoping that it would not be voted that it wouldn't pass. Unfortunately, my opponent, Dick Blumenthal, supported that and voted for it. I called him out at the time for having betrayed Israel. And that's one thing I can promise you I will never do. I believe in a strong relationship between the United States and Israel because it is good policy for the United States. Yes, it is good policy for Israel, but most of all, it's in my DNA. It is who I am. I also was very fortunate to have been invited to be asked to be part of the American delegation to the opening of the embassy in Jerusalem. I was there. It still gives me goosebumps, frankly, when I think of being there, when I remember it. And it was a historic day and a wonderful day. And I will always be grateful for having the opportunity to have witnessed history that way. So now I've given you a little bit of an idea of who I am and why I'm running. And I'm looking forward to your questions and getting to know you better. Thank you.
I appreciate that very much. That was your story is a wonderful story. And you definitely hit on some points that we will be hitting. One of which you mentioned some of the police accountability issues. But if you are elected in a few weeks, can you name us some other, let's say your top 2 or 3 objectives or your policy objectives if you are elected this coming November?
Yes. Well, when I am elected, it will indicate that there is a Republican majority. And I think our first job is to make sure people can afford life again. The trillions of dollars of spending from the American Relief Plan and the what I call the Mansion Cinema Build Inflation Back Better plan. It was another trillions more passed to, sorry, it was 900 billion plus more passed to reduce inflation and address climate change, reduce climate change. Unfortunately, we have heard from economic experts and scientists that it will do neither. And in fact, once they added the student loan forgiveness, it actually, those two together will again add to our deficit and our debt. So I think we need to stop the spending. Another priority of mine, I mentioned the invasion at our border. I am an immigrant. I'm a legal immigrant to this country. I believe in legal immigration. It is good for our country. I've been working on a plan, a legal immigration plan, frankly, since 2008, when I was invited to attend an international conference on legal immigration. And you know, there's a big gray area. There are a lot of things we can do between mass deportation and mass citizenship. We need immigrants. But we need to be the ones to decide who comes into our country. And so I'm looking forward to working with my friend, Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar, to she's proposed the Dignity Act. It has some great provisions. I think it can be improved even more, and I really look forward to working on that. Again, I did mention one of the things I'd like to do is to make federal funds to municipalities and states contingent on their providing qualified immunity to their officers, their police officers. Without that, our police officers cannot do their jobs. What's been created in the state is a huge deficit of cops. We've had a lot of them quit. I think on the state police level, they need 1,200. Right now, we're at around 800. In my own town of Greenwich, we're down 30 cops, and they can't fill those slots. They don't even have people applying for the jobs, and that's duplicated all over the state. So we must support our police. This was a very tough week here in Connecticut. I attended the funeral of the two police officers, one in Bristol, who were ambushed and brutally murdered. You know, it was very moving, and to watch their wives clutch the flags that had draped their coffins was so touching, and it's something I'll never forget. This shouldn't have happened, and I lay it at the feet of the Democrats in our state who passed that police accountability law and created an anti-police climate in our state. I also am very supportive of parental rights. I'm a mother. I raised 3 sons here in Connecticut. As a Jewish mother, I like to say they're perfect, but one's engaged. We're really excited about that. The other 2 are available, and don't tell them I said that.
If anyone's out there listening.
I don't think they're listening. I know they're driving right now, but as a mother, I was always involved with their education. I was the mother. I was always class mother, team mother, on the parents board. I knew their teachers, was involved with their work. One of the reasons, we've been successful in raising 3 Zionist sons is that when they came home, when we had discussions over dinner, we would ask them, "So what did you learn today?" And they would say, they'd tell us what they learned, and then we'd set them straight. So parents have every right to be involved with their children's education and the curriculum. And having escaped Cuba, one of the first things Castro did when he took over was to indoctrinate the children, to indoctrinate them against their parents, to spy and inform on their parents. And he tried to replace the parents in their minds as a father figure. So I'm very sensitive to this. I'm very concerned of some of the things I see being taught in our schools, like critical race theory, like gender fluidity, and other inappropriate sexual curriculum to young children who have a right to a childhood and to their innocence. And those are the discussions that belong in the family setting, not in school. And it is certainly not up to the school to make that decision of when to introduce those things. So those are the issues that concern me most. And those are the issues that I'm going to Washington to address. Thank you.
Thank you for that. A few legislative issues that my organization has been supportive of, and we will certainly, if you are elected in a couple of weeks, be asking you about. So with that, securing our Jewish institutions from attacks continues to be a major concern for the Jewish community. Funding for the nonprofit security grant program is crucial to allow our Jewish institutions needed security protections. If you are elected, would you be supportive of this funding program?
Yes, I will be supportive. I understand the need. First of all, it always makes me sad that when we go to services at our synagogue, we must have armed security. But that's a fact of life. And so also I should tell you, my sister and my parents and all of my sister's kids, adult kids, live in Pittsburgh. My sister lectures at the Tree of Life Synagogue. My parents live down the street from it. My sister knows the rabbi, knows the congregation there. So when, it is very much on my radar. She also knows the rabbi at the Poway Synagogue in San Diego. So please, this is definitely something I understand the importance of and that I would support.
Thank you for that. The U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights is there to help protect Jewish students on campuses fight not just anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism on campus. Would you be supportive of additional resources for this department, again, to help fight this on college campuses?
I am very aware of what is happening on college campuses. 70% of Jewish students on college campuses say they have experienced anti-Semitism directly. I can tell you from my childhood, I grew up in the Jim Crow South. I not only witnessed racism against others, but I experienced anti-Semitism personally from the time I was a child. And I can tell you stories that you just wouldn't believe. I was called every pejorative in the book for Jews, for Hispanics, and frankly, I was even called the N-word by a group of kids who really took pleasure in bullying me. So I am very conscious of this. We must address it. We must stop it. If the Federal Department of Education is the correct agency to do this, I would be supportive of this program. I would like to make sure that I'd like to see what other similar programs might exist in other agencies, and perhaps we could combine programs in order to save the government some money. But this must be addressed, and it must be addressed in the most effective way possible.
Thank you for that. Congress passed domestic terrorism legislation this past session, but unfortunately, as of now, it doesn't have the 60 votes in the Senate. If you were elected, and if this were to come back next session, would you be supportive? And for those in the audience who don't know what this is, it's an act designated to combat the growing threat of domestic violence, extremist groups and individuals. So would you, again, if it were to come back, would you be supportive?
Well, what concerns me is that this would be narrowly defined as to specifically which groups would be included in this bill. I'm concerned that it could be politicized to be used against your political opponents. And I think that's why you found the opposition that you found when it was proposed initially. So frankly, I would like to participate in rewriting that legislation, in tightening it up, making it better, so that more senators from both parties could support it.
Thank you for that. The Holocaust Survivor Assistance Act has been a priority for JFAC for many years. Needless to say, of course, we would be supportive. It provides services to meet the urgent needs of Holocaust survivors to age in place. Would you be supportive of this, again, if you were elected in a few weeks?
Well, I told you my personal family history, that my mother's family was murdered in the Holocaust. It's only because of little Leo, after whom I'm named. And so I forgot to mention this in the opening, but I know I bear a responsibility. I carry his legacy. I have the responsibility of making the right decisions, doing the right thing with my life, making a difference in the positive way in the world around me with this life that I have been given. So I'm very aware of the issues surrounding Holocaust survivors. I have one cousin left. It was an amazing story. Her parents were the only ones in our family who survived from Lithuania. They were each in different concentration camps before they were in the Kovno ghetto. And before the Germans were able to come in for a Kinderoxy, they had contacted somebody on the outside, a Rebbitzin, who was passing as Gentile and who was rescuing Jewish kids. My cousin, at age 18 months, was drugged and put into a potato sack, thrown over the wall of the ghetto, praying that she would land in the farmer's wagon full of potato sacks. And then she woke up with strangers. And it was several years. This Rebbitzin managed to get a group of Jewish children to then Palestine, now Israel. Eventually, both of her parents survived each of their ordeals, were reunited. This is an amazing story. One of our cousins, American cousins, who was in the American Army and was serving in the occupation forces, found one, helped them find each other. They were reunited. They got to Cuba, where the rest of the family was, and eventually found their way to Palestine and found their daughter. So it's an amazing story. She's in her 80s today. And yes, I would definitely support this funding for Holocaust survivors without a second thought.
Wonderful. Thank you. We now have a couple foreign affairs questions. JFAX has been certainly supportive of the 10-year, $38 billion investment with Israel. I think I know your answer here, but have to ask the question. Would you be supportive of the continuation of the MOU and support for Iron Dome?
You bet I will. And I can tell you, frankly, my cousins who live in Tel Aviv have shown me the pieces of the Scud missiles that were shot by Saddam Hussein at Israel during the first Gulf War that fell on the roof of their house. And those missiles were destroyed by the Iron Dome. So yes, I absolutely will support that, and I will look to expand any other type of cooperation in developing weapon systems between the United States and Israel that we could do. It's good for America. It's good for Israel. It's really good for our defense contractors here in Connecticut as well. We need more Connecticut jobs.
Absolutely. That leads us to the next question you bring up with good for America, good for Israel. Certainly, the United States played a key role in the Abraham Accords. If you are elected to Congress, how would you potentially expand the Abraham Accords so that Israel can get, we can further foster Israel's long-sought peace with its Arab neighbors?
Well, I am a great admirer of the Abraham Accords. That was a really ingenious way to go about making peace, figuring out that the Palestinians who had no intention of coming to the table, we could do an end run around them and talk to Arab countries who were willing to make peace and do it based on economics, which always makes good business makes good partners. So I would look to expand it any way I could to be helpful in that way with other countries. One of the things I didn't tell you is I spent 2.5 years in a process. I was nominated to be ambassador to Chile. And in that process, I worked at the State Department for 1.5 years. I graduated from ambassador school. So I have some training in diplomacy, and I would be as helpful as I could be in talking with other countries who might want to sign on. Yeah, I would do everything I could to help that process and improve that process.
Thank you.
Oh, if I could add one thing.
Of course, please.
All right. One thing that has disappointed me greatly and that I really don't understand is why the Biden administration seems to be trying to undermine the Abraham Accords. I know that there's a political difference between the two administrations, but peace is a good thing. And I really don't understand the track that they've taken in trying to undermine that agreement. So it's
not sure where the potential new Iran deal is, and so I'll ask a broader question on Iran.
I'm happy to answer that one.
If you're elected in a couple of weeks, what would you do? What would you potentially submit legislative wise or funding wise? Or intelligence-wise to combat the ever-present threat that is Iran?
Iran is the largest state sponsor of terror in the world. They have more American blood on their hands than any other country. I urged my opponent at the time not to sign that agreement. He, in a letter to his office, he not to sign. I didn't mean sign it. He didn't vote against it. It was a very convoluted vote that they took because it is not an official treaty. They couldn't get the votes necessary to ratify it as a treaty. So they came up with this convoluted process. He supports that agreement. I have already pushed for an answer. What will you do now? Would you support it again? Because, besides the fact that Iran would like nothing better than to destroy Israel, Israel's a little Satan. It's the United States that is ultimately their target. And from the things I have read about what's coming down the pike, first of all, they're negotiating with Russia and Iran. How could we be negotiating with Russia while we're supporting Ukraine against Russia. That doesn't make sense. Then Russia is going to be building a nuclear reactor in Iran. And this agreement guarantees that Iran will get a nuclear weapon. You know, the job of government, first and foremost, is to keep people safe, whether that is on the local level with your police, on the state level with the state police and the National Guard, or whether it's on the national level to make sure our enemies are not able to attack us with nuclear weapons, with intercontinental ballistic missiles. This agreement would be a disaster. And as senator, I would never vote for an agreement unless Iran had unless there was regime change. I support the idea of regime change in Iran. I support the Iranian people who are demonstrating for their freedom right now. The brave women who are out in the streets in the wake of the killing of that young girl for not wearing her headscarf appropriately. You know, my opponent and this administration have said nothing. They're silent on this. How could that be? It's exactly what Obama did. President Obama did that in his time when the Iranian people were demonstrating for freedom. And he said, well, it's really not our business. We won't mix in. You know, I'm sorry, but these people are fighting for their freedom and their liberty from this dictatorial, ruthless, terrorist regime. And we should be supporting them. We should not be negotiating another deal with them, providing them with billions of dollars of hard currency so that they can pass it on to Hamas and Hezbollah and let their own IRGC commit terrorism against Americans and other innocents around the world. So no, I am a staunch opponent of making a new Iran deal unless there's regime change, and it would absolutely not provide for Iran developing nuclear weapons and the means with which to deliver them.
So we are coming up, unfortunately, there are well over 15 questions in the Q&A. Unfortunately, we easily could have done 2 hours here, but unfortunately, we are unfortunately mindful of time and won't get to everyone's questions. Do appreciate everyone's questions. Would like, first of all, thank you. Would love to give you an opportunity. You've covered quite an amount in about 27 minutes to make a closing statement. So please.
Thank you. Well, I would like to reiterate how important the fight against anti-Semitism and racism is to me. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about my growing up experience. As I told you, I grew up in the Jim Crow South. I was in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg public schools at the time that Charlotte became one of the first school districts to desegregate its schools. Most of my friends, even my 2 sisters, went to private school. They left the public school system. My parents tried to force me to go to private school. I was accepted at the best one, but I refused to go because I knew that I would have to learn to get along with everyone at some point in my life. And I decided I wanted to be part of the solution, not the problem. This was a decision I made in 9th grade. I want to contrast that with my opponent, who recently, it came out that when he was in high school, he was a student body president. He organized a fundraiser called Slave Day to raise money for their student council. You know, as a senior in high school, you're old enough to know right from wrong. I was old enough in 9th grade. And you know, I hope you'll ask him to explain that, because I don't think it's funny. That was, you know, 100 years after the Civil War. That's not that much time in a span of history. So I hope you'll ask him to explain that. Again, I am running for US Senate because I love this country. I have lived an American dream. I want that opportunity for our children and for theirs. I know I can make a difference in Washington. I have made a difference in every other thing I have done in my life. And I hope you'll give me the opportunity. It's a very close race. The polls has us at single digits. My opponent is under 50% as an incumbent. And everywhere I go around the state, I have people coming up to me, telling me, people of all backgrounds, Democrats, independents, and of course, Republicans, saying to me, don't tell anyone, but we're going to vote for you. And it feels great on the ground. I'm very grateful for their support. I am not a career politician. My opponent is a 37-year career politician. I call myself a career American. So if you want continued high prices, if you want a continued shortage of American energy, when frankly, we were energy independent, we have the greatest reserves in the world, and we produce it more cleanly than anyone else. So I don't know why we would want to go to adversaries like Venezuela or Iran and frenemies, questionable countries like Saudi Arabia, and beg them to produce for us. That doesn't make sense to me. We want good American jobs. We want good American clean energy. And it's a matter of national security as well. I would never support the draining of our strategic petroleum reserve. My opponent supports that. That is foolish, it is irresponsible, and it leaves us vulnerable to our enemies. So all of these things, if you're concerned about them, if you're concerned about the rising crime in our communities, if you're concerned about parental rights and the education your children are getting, is it an education that will prepare them for the future, or is it just a political agenda? If you're concerned as I am, I hope you'll vote for me. And I appreciate the opportunity to meet you and to speak to you, and hope that I've given you a little insight into who I am.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for the time. It was a pleasure to meet you. We will now bring on Mr. Richard Blumenthal. While you come on board, I'll say welcome. I'll give you an opportunity to take a couple minutes to give an opening statement, and then we will begin with the questions. Welcome, Mr. Blumenthal.
Thank you. I am really honored and grateful to be back with you. I think I know a good many of the people on the call. I don't know who in total is on the call, but Michael, you and I have worked together, and I know that the members of JFACT and I have worked together throughout the pandemic, throughout tough times for Israel, difficult moments for the community when there were acts of hate crimes and threats to the security of our community. And I just want to thank all of you for your leadership in our community. It has been extraordinarily meaningful, and personally, thank you. Let me just begin by saying that I'm proud of having served in the United States Senate and for 20 years as Attorney General when I sought to combat hate crimes. Now in the United States Senate, I have been the leader of the major legislation passed by the Senate, most recently the COVID Hate Crimes Act, which incorporated my No Hate Act, named initially for Jabbar and Hire, the two victims known best for, unfortunately, their deaths at the hands of hate crime perpetrators. I'm also proud to be a strong, longstanding supporter of Israel, endorsed by AIPAC, because I have championed the security programs that are necessary for Israel's existence. And they are one of our best allies in the whole world. So apart from my having family in Israel and being bound by faith and culture, I also, as a United States Senator and a public office holder, feel that Israel's security is vital to our security. And that's why I'm championing the Iron Dome. I went to the floor twice, by the way, after the House passed it, trying to get unanimous consent. On both occasions, Rand Paul blocked it, in spite of my arguing with a lot of support on both sides of the aisle. And Israel has always been a bipartisan issue. despite efforts to drive a wedge and use it as a wedge issue. And if I say nothing else that you remember about my feelings on Israel as a public policy matter, we need to maintain that bipartisan support. So I am open to your questions and happy to answer any of them dealing with these topics or any of the other topics that you have on your mind unrelated to anti-Semitism, white supremacy, and Israel.
Appreciate that. So if you are, well, we'll start this. If you are, in your case, reelected in a few weeks, do you have 2 or 3 of your legislative priorities that you would be supportive of with your new 6-year term?
I do. And let me just frame it this way. We need to bring this country together. We need to reach across the aisle. Instead of hurling insults, we need to heal our divisions. And those divisions ultimately pose the threat of destroying the United States unless we can work together, Republicans and Democrats, as I have done, whether it's on human trafficking, where I worked with Rob Portman, or on the Ukraine resolution to designate Russia a state sponsor of terrorism, where I worked with Lindsey Graham, many other initiatives. That's point number 1. Point number 2, I think we need to make life in the United States and in Connecticut more affordable and safer. Bring down costs. We've begun by bringing down medical costs in the Inflation Reduction Act, as you know, capping out-of-pocket costs, for example, for our seniors, fighting climate change. And I am proudest, in a way, of what we've done on veterans, because I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee in addition to the Armed Services Committee, the PAC Act, which offers for the first time, very first time, care and benefits for veterans who suffered from exposure to the burn pits in Afghanistan and Iraq, causing cancer, 23 separate kinds of cancer, hideous, pernicious forms of diseases like glioblastoma, emphysema, all kinds of lung disease. And now they can get care and benefits and they can get screening. Please talk to your friends or your children, your friends' children who may have been in Iraq and Afghanistan, and remind them they can get screening. Very important. So one of my priorities is going to be to implement that act in a way that reaches as many people as possible. And let me say, maybe most importantly, to answer your question, my priority is going to be to preserve and restore our freedoms, preserve our democracy against the threat of white supremacy, anti-Semitism, domestic terrorism, violent extremism that have been legitimized in some ways by public leaders condoning or emboldening them. And you and I have talked, Michael, about the threat to our democracy. It is, if anything, growing in intensity. And I'm hopeful that we can reach across the aisle, counter them, and also preserve our freedoms. Women's right to decide when and whether to have children. I trust women to make that decision, not government officials. I will fight for a national law that I've written, the Women's Health Protection Act, that simply codifies Roe v. Wade. It writes it into our statutes, not without restrictions for the life and safety of the mother after those restrictions go into effect, after viability, but a common sense, sensible codification of Roe v. Wade. And I believe that if my opponent becomes the 51st vote in the Senate for Mitch McConnell, he will undoubtedly seek a national ban on abortion, and she will be the 51st vote for him. So that's the danger that we face on reproductive rights. Connecticut's law, which protects women, I helped to codify it back in the 1990s, leading that effort when I was state legislator and attorney general. Our laws will be overridden, including the most recent one providing a safe haven, overridden because federal law overrides state law. And on that issue, reproductive rights, on voting rights, on the rights of interracial marriage and marriage equality that Clarence Thomas raised in his concurring opinion, the next Supreme Court cases dealing with it. We need someone in the United States Senate who will fight to preserve those fundamental freedoms and rights, most especially a woman's right to choose.
Thank you for that. I will ask these questions a little bit differently because you have of the legislative issues we've supported. You have been supportive in the past. So I just, for the audience, I will ask these a little bit different. Less background is needed. For the nonprofit security grant program, you have been very supportive of additional increases over the years. We are now in the current budget in Congress. There's 360 million, which is, we are truly appreciative. If you are reelected in a couple of weeks, will you continue to be supportive of that crucial program for our Jewish institutions?
Michael, I put my money where my mouth is. I have long advocated that security program, partly because I listened to you and other leaders in our own community about the threats. And so you're absolutely right. We will increase it this year, if I have anything to do with it, and I've worked for it, from 260 million to 310 million. An increase that I think is, I'm sorry, from 250 million to 360 million. I want to get the full number. And I think it's important to keep increasing that program because the threats are certainly not diminishing. If anything, as I indicated, increasing. And again, I would never support a political leader who says in a demonstration like Charlottesville, they're good people on both sides. Good people on both sides. One of the sides carrying swastikas. Good people on both sides who engage or at least legitimize terrorist activities within our own country. I think that is wrong.
Thank you for that. The U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights is there to help protect Jewish students on campuses, fight anti-Semitism and in some cases anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism on campus. Would you be supportive of additional resources for this department?
I have actually advocated successfully in this budget an increase from 131 million to 161 million dollars. And I will do everything possible to preserve that amount as it goes through the legislative process. I'm a strong believer that the Office of Civil Rights has to protect young people on campus. You know, let me be very blunt. All of us have been victims of anti-Semitism in one way or another, and our children as well. We know what it means not only to be insulted, but to be discriminated against. And young people don't deserve this kind of continued religious antipathy on campus. And that's one of the reasons why I support this program.
Thank you for that. I think I certainly don't want to assume anything, but I know in this case, I think I can go on the ledge. Assuming if you are reelected in a few weeks, the domestic terrorism legislation, if that gets resubmitted next year, would you be supportive of this measure? Strongly.
I voted for it. I vote for it again. As you know, it failed on a party line vote in the Senate, 47 to 47. I am disappointed that none of my Republican colleagues voted for it. And I would strongly support it. Again, it seems unfathomable to me. By the way, this is not broad, overextensive legislation. It simply fights terrorism domestically. I also want to say that I am one of the leaders on the Disarm Hate Act, which, as you know, would separate people from firearms if they're convicted of hate crimes, violent hate crimes. I think it's important that we not continue to arm people who engage in terrorist acts. As abominable and abhorrent as they are, they can be all the more deadly if they are done with firearms.
You did bring up previously the Jabara Hire No Aid Act, which for transparency was was one of your bills. It got through. We've advocated for additional funding for that, of which there is in the current budget, as you mentioned. Certainly, if you are reelected, would you continue to not just be supportive of that? Are there other measures that you are looking to do to not just in terms of hate crimes, but hate crimes reporting or hate incidents reporting? Are there other things you are considering if you get reelected?
Excellent question, Michael, because as you know, one of the main objections, and I'm talking a little bit now like a prosecutor, which I was as the federal United States attorney, and then I was involved in law enforcement as attorney general, pursuing hate crimes civilly. Reporting is so important. People are reluctant, whether out of embarrassment or shame, to report that swastikas have been drawn on their garage doors or there's been vandalism. Some people regard it as pranks. We know how serious they are. They should be reported. And so I think we need even stronger programs to provide for reporting. And here's an area where I think the police need and deserve support. The police are as repulsed as we are by these acts of vandalism that are hate-based, whether they're directed against Jews or Blacks or Muslims. I've been so impressed by the good faith and real leadership from our police, whether it's in West Hartford or Waterbury, go across the state. And so I've supported the police in a variety of areas, $45 million for jobs, training, more cops on the street. I supported 100,000 more cops across the nation. Josh Hawley's amendment not long ago. And I think in this area in particularly, we should be investing more in our police and law enforcement so that they can investigate more effectively with forensic aid. Remember, sometimes these are difficult cases to track and trace. Supporting police in this effort will be a priority of mine. Already has been. I've already been talking to Mazie Hirono, who was my partner in the COVID-19. I want to give her a ton of credit, by the way. You know, in the midst of the Asian attacks, this kind of gave us the momentum, and Mazie stepped forward, and we put our bills together. We got Republican support. With another couple of hours on this phone call, I could tell you some fascinating stories about enlisting my Republican colleagues in this effort, but it passed overwhelmingly. Again, another example of reaching across the aisle to get things done.
So we'll turn to some foreign affairs issue. And the first question I'll bring up with regards to support for the continuation of the 10-year, $38 billion MOU with Israel and support for, funding for Iron Dome. You've been supportive, but one question one side question I want to ask is, and you brought it up in your opening statement, is sometimes Israel in Congress has become less bipartisan. There have been some issues in the Democratic caucus in the House and Senate. So would you be supportive if you are reelected? And what can you do so that this longstanding funding is not in jeopardy?
I've worked hard on maintaining bipartisanship, and without going into all the details, and I think folks on this call are well aware of some of the efforts to use Israel as a wedge issue, and it continues right now to this day as we speak. I have worked with colleagues ranging from Lindsey Graham, John McCain, who became a good friend. We traveled together to Israel, and other Republicans to preserve that core of bipartisan support. I think we've done it. I think we are succeeding. On the Armed Services Committee, took some work, but we had very broad, deep support for that 3.8 million, that it is an extension of the 38 billion. I'm sorry, I said million, 3.8 billion. You know, I'm just a country lawyer from Connecticut. These numbers all get away from me. 38 billion, but you know, we're going to have to do even more, because that region has become ever more dangerous because Iran remains an increasing threat, especially in its seeming alliance with Russia. And the Israelis have taken a very nuanced stand on Ukraine because of that special position that they occupy vis-a-vis the Russians, the need for airspace over that part of the world. You know, these issues are so complicated, Michael, as everybody on this call knows. To try to reduce them to simple bumper sticker slogans makes no sense. But working across the aisle, I am very confident that if I am returned to the United States Senate, I can continue to play a central role in keeping Israel a bipartisan issue.
Thank you for that. You just brought up Iran. Whether it's, where's the potential new agreement lie, or, how would you, if you're reelected in a few weeks, how would you combat the ever-present threat of Iran?
Well, I've said I wouldn't go back to the old JCPOA. My opponent has kind of made it a straw man. I don't know whether she fully understands what my position is. By the way, I think the people of Iran who are right now braving their personal safety in the streets, particularly the women who are leading it, deserve our strong support. I have made statements, I've tweeted, as have many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in support of them. But right now, there's no immediate prospect of any deal. There is no imminent possibility, in my view, of negotiations. How could we possibly negotiate with Russia, let alone Iran, when it is a terrorist state? Iran is a terrorist state. So are North Korea and a small club of nations. And I've led the effort with Lindsey Graham to designate Russia as a terrorist state and to deprive aid of any country that recognizes its sham annexation of 4 regions in Ukraine. You know, the fight in Ukraine is fundamental to our security, not just because it's about independence and freedom of a nation of people who deserve their independence and freedom and the values that we hold dear, and are fiercely and bravely fighting on the battlefield. But it is about our own security, because the threat to NATO from Putin is real and imminent. And how could we engage in negotiations with Russia? I would be very, very doubtful that for some time, frankly, I think that the Russian people would be well served without Putin. And I hope that perhaps his losses on the battlefield, when they become known, as inevitably they must be, because those body bags are going to be coming home, they may have a different mindset about Putin as their leader. And I think that Putin is a war criminal. He's a KGB thug. Negotiating with him is an unavailing proposition, and trusting him is the height of foolishness.
What steps do you believe, would you take, again, assuming if you get reelected in a few weeks, regarding the potential expansion of the Abraham Accords to help, again, Israel's long-sought peace with its Arab neighbors?
I would promote the Abraham Accords and their expansion in any possible way. But let me also say that the Abraham Accords recognize our common cause against Iran. Many of those nations that have joined the Abraham Accord are in the path of Iran's threat. Obviously, to Israel, it's an existential threat. And let me say further about Iran, there's no more important fact in that region that should unite us than stopping a nuclear-armed Iran. Let's come together on that essential proposition, all of us in this country, and everyone who believes in self-determination and freedom for Israel and its neighbors. We must stop a nuclear-armed Iran. Now, if there is a diplomatic path, we should pursue it. Right now, there seems to be none. Israel faced with an existential threat, will have to explore its own option. But I believe strongly that the JCPOA, unless it were made longer, stronger, more verifiable, unless it covered the malign terrorist activities of Iran in that region, and unless it covered the development of ballistic missiles, as well as tight, secure, verifiable conditions stopping any nuclear development and dismantling what it has now, could not be accepted by this country.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have time for one more question, and there's a question from the audience again of foreign related. I will say Jewish federations across Connecticut and across North America have raised north of $60 million for Ukrainian refugees to help with humanitarian aid and helping them make Aliyah to Israel. If you're reelected, would you support additional resources for not just Ukrainians, Afghanis, and others entering the United States, including supporting the Afghan Adjustment Act? Can you please discuss that?
I'm one of the authors of the Afghan Adjustment Act, as you know. It is a bipartisan measure, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. I'm very proud that Roy Blunt, Lindsey Graham, Joni Ernst have joined me, Chris Coons, and Senator Klobuchar. And I believe we'll have bipartisan support for it. The Afghan Adjustment Act enables those at-risk Afghan allies and a lot of other Afghans who put their lives on the line for freedom and democracy to come to this country and have a path to a green card status. Right now, all they have is humanitarian parole, which is limited in time, as you know. 2 of my sons have served during this 20 years. One of them, Matt, an infantry officer, Marine in Afghanistan. The other, Michael, as a Navy SEAL. Matt succeeded in getting his interpreter out of Afghanistan. I know firsthand from my visits to Afghanistan how much it means to our veterans to bring them out of Afghanistan. And I've been critical of the administration. I'll just say very bluntly, I have been critical of top leaders in the administration for the way that this withdrawal was handled, insofar as it put at even greater risk, targets on their backs, those interpreters, guards, and others who helped us, in fact, put their lives on the line. So yes, with respect to the Afghan refugees and the Ukrainians, 100,000 of them, I would support giving them the kind of status and aid that they need. And let me just emphasize to you, Michael, how grateful I am to the federations. I have been all around the state, as you know. We've done press events together. I have said it publicly. I want to say it again to everybody on this call. You have stepped forward in a way that is really inspiring. It is the best about our community, that we welcome the stranger. And we know that we have been a stranger in other lands. My dad came to this country in 1935. He was 17 years old. He came alone, by the way, 17 years old. He spoke nothing more. He spoke very little English, had nothing more than a shirt on his back. He knew almost no one. And this country gave him a chance to succeed. When I first went to Israel on the first of my official trips, you know, I went with John McCain and Lindsey and a few others. I will tell you, I was the only Democrat and the only Jew. And we flew into Tel Aviv. And I thought to myself, what would my father think? Son of an immigrant who came to this country in that way. We are the greatest country in the history of the world because we are a nation of immigrants. We have a border security problem. We need to do something about our broken immigration system. But if you ever lose faith in this country, go to an immigration and naturalization proceeding. and see 50, 60 people raise their right hand and take the oath to become citizens. It is so inspiring. They will never take it for granted. And when I speak to them, I say, I know you took a test that a lot of Americans couldn't pass. And they smile at me. They laugh, just like you are, because they know it's true.
Correct.
So I just want to thank the federations for welcoming and helping with resettlement of so many Afghans. I know you're helping with Ukrainians. It is truly a mitzvah and an extraordinary act of leadership and generosity. Thank you.
Thank you. That was pretty close to a closing statement, but I'll give you please to take another a moment or two to make a closing statement, please.
I will be very brief. I sort of feel like I just made my closing statement, but you know, you give a senator a chance to talk, and you almost never says no. So let me just again thank you. You know, I'm proud of having served in the roles that I have. I think the most important thing I do as I travel around the state, you know, there's an old joke about me that Blumenthal will be at a garage door opening. And I consider it part of my job to listen, to really listen. The old saying, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that maybe we do more listening than talking. And the folks on this call have been great advisors, and I've tried to listen to them, as I have so many others in the state. And I'm proud of the fact that I've been able to help people in this role, not just with big pieces of legislation or big lawsuits when I was Attorney General, but individuals who need Social Security or a visa or some other kind of way that I can help them. And it is in many ways the most satisfying part of my job. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be your United States Senator.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will bring this to a close. I want to say thank you for everyone who tuned in to not just this, but our other 3 forums that we had. We had several hundred people participate, which is great. Now that they're all done, I will create a mass email and send out all of the links so that you can watch this and other forums. I'd like to thank the 7 Jewish Federations across Connecticut for sponsoring. With that, please get out and vote this coming election day. Take care, everybody.